Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pam Greensky. I'm the Director of Operations here at Advisicon, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is Best Practices in PM Documentation Using SharePoint. A quick summary of who we are here at Advisicon. We're a group of authors, teachers, consultants, and technologists that care a lot about helping organizations learn, scale, and grow through blending methodology and technology to deliver results. It doesn't matter the company size, our team specializes in maximizing your business and personal productivity by leveraging the Microsoft technology experience. We offer bi-weekly webinars, which here at Advisicon we refer to as Webinar Wednesdays, in which we spend 30 minutes to an hour talking about topics ranging from Microsoft Project, Project Server, Project Online, Power BI, Visio, SharePoint, to project program, portfolio management, and methodology approaches. And with attending any of our webinars, you receive free PDUs. We all love free PDUs. Today's webinar is Best Practices in PM Documentation Using SharePoint, in which you'll receive a half PDU. And so just before we get started here, I'm just going to cover a couple things about the control panel. It's usually in the top right of your screen, and the control panel gives you the option to adjust your volume, the screen, and some other settings. And during this presentation, the audience is muted, so in order to ask a question, you'll have to leave your text questions in the questions pane of the control panel. And you can send your questions at any time, and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation if we have time. If not, we usually respond via email. Well, it's now my pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Kevin Bruder. Kevin is one of Advisicon's senior project managers and the lead of our products and applications division. Kevin has years of Microsoft technology experience and a lot of training experience as well. Kevin has instructed several Webinar Wednesday sessions, and he usually does a pretty good job helping us learn tips and tricks that are pretty valuable. So I'll quit gushing about you, Kevin, and I'll hand this webinar over to you. So go ahead, Kevin, take it away.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for that introduction. So as Pam mentioned, today we're going to be talking about SharePoint and PM documentation best practices. So what does that mean? Well, you can see on the agenda here, we're going to start by just talking about your basic document management. If you've ever used SharePoint before, that's typically where everyone starts. Just how to organize your documents, how do we use document libraries, and we'll transition from there into some more advanced topics. So once you've mastered that, how do we use more of the features of SharePoint to help automate and create efficiencies in our project management documentation tasks? And of course, we're going to do a demo. That's just usually my favorite part. So I've got some things prepared for you to see. So we'll start with the basics, document management in SharePoint. If you've used SharePoint before, you've likely used it to store documents. And of course, documents in SharePoint are stored in what is called a document library. We have some best practices around document libraries that, some of them are pretty straightforward, but a lot of them are overlooked. And they're very important to maximizing your document management potential. So the first thing we like to say is wherever possible, use metadata instead of folders. And so what does that mean? We're going to see the term metadata a lot in this document. What metadata means is it's synonymous with properties, or sometimes they're called columns or fields, and it's just extra data you can store about a document that isn't within the document itself. So that can be things like the document phase, whether the document is approved or a draft or a final version. You could store really any type of metadata you want, everything ranging from people to just text fields. And our approach here is to use that metadata in conjunction with views and filters and group bys instead of using folders as much as possible. And the reason for that is it unlocks the data a little bit. If you're just going to use folders like you would in a traditional, file share or something like that, you can't really pull that metadata very well to automate it You can't do really any type of permission things with them. And you do have some performance and limitations when using folders. So one big limitation we see people run into is the file path limit. What that means is if you have a document that's nested down deep in 15 different folders way down the level, and those folders all have big names, if you reach over 255 or so characters in that full path to get to the document, you're going to run into some issues. So that's just another reason why we really want to try to avoid using folders in SharePoint. And so how do we get around that? Well, we can use views, we can use filters, we can use group bys. We'll show you some of that in the demo. And then from there, when we've got that kind of mastered, we know what we're doing with our metadata. We also recommend using site level, both content types and columns. And so that would be site level metadata. The reason that we like using site level fields or columns or metadata, whichever term you prefer to use, is that you can use those columns across multiple libraries. And if you make a change or need to rename a column or something of that nature, you only need to do it one time, and you can then apply that across all of your document libraries. Content types are basically types of documents, and a lot of people don't even use them. But we do recommend, if you have that level of maturity, to use content types. It helps you organize your documents. You can add templates to your content types. So if someone wants to create, say, a new status report for that week, they can just click the new button. It'll drop down, what kind of content type do you want to create? You click status report, and boom, you can have SharePoint automatically load up a template that you want for your status report. And so that way it makes it more efficient. It also makes it all consistent, so you've got the same template for that entire content type. Another best practice, we want to avoid using item level permissions. What do I mean by that? You want to, at the lowest level, control permissions at your document library. Preferably, just keep the permissions the same as the SharePoint site. But we want to avoid changing permissions on an individual document. There's many reasons for that. One is mostly for your sanity, because as the person managing the permissions, if you have to manage permissions on each and every document, you'll go crazy. The other thing is there is a performance consideration. So when SharePoint goes to load, it can calculate the permissions just once at the library level or at the site level, versus if you have it on each individual document, it will take a lot longer to load. And the last thing is using something called enterprise keywords and also other managed metadata for tagging your documents wherever possible. Enterprise keywords is a built-in feature in SharePoint. You kind of have to enable it, but there's good tutorials out there on how to do that. And basically, it's meant for tagging. So your users can tag their documents with any type of tag they want, but it's an editable type dropdown. So as they start typing, it'll recommend tags that have been previously used. And so that way you can tag your documents. And what that really does is makes it easier to find documents. In particular, it makes it easier for searching. So if someone happens to search for that tag or something close to that tag, even if that document doesn't contain whatever that tag is in the title or in the document somewhere, that way it'll come up because it's been tagged with that keyword. Another best practice around document management, especially for project managers, is using OneNote on your SharePoint, especially for meeting notes. So we're going to show you in the demo the really great integration with OneNote, Outlook, and Skype that can help make your whole process of taking and sharing and publishing meeting notes completely automated and much easier to manage. So we'll go from your basic document management. I guess basic might not be the right word there, but from document management, where we're still using documents, to what else can we do? And so when we get to that next level of maturity, what we want to do is get rid of the document wherever possible. You're going to always need documents, but if some of your processes that might currently be based in an Excel document or based in a Word form template can be automated even further if we take them out of the document. We want to grab all that data we'd normally store in Word and bring it up to the SharePoint level so that it's accessible. And we do that using SharePoint lists. And so if you've never used a SharePoint list before, it is very much the same as a library, but the document does not exist. There's no document associated. You can still do attachments, but in general, it's the same as a library, but without the document. And so all that data that you would normally put in your document, you store in metadata or list columns or fields, whatever term you want to use. You store all of the data in various fields. And you can somewhat see what that looks like in the image on the right. I believe that's a risks list, for example. So normally where you'd have a document, maybe an Excel document that describes the risk in terms of the description, the mitigation plan, your probability, your impact. You can take all that data that you normally put in the document and put it into list columns. And there's a very good reason we want to do that, because we cannot, from SharePoint, access the data that's in our documents very easily. When they're in list columns, we can then use all that data in different views. We can use it in workflows to send automated emails and various things like that. We can use it in reporting, so we can access that from Power BI if we want to create some really cool reports. Some common examples I have listed there for project managers and processes they probably do in documents today that are really good examples to put into a SharePoint list. We've got risks, issues, and opportunities. Those are prime examples for using a SharePoint list. Action items, work breakdown structures, tasks, if you're not using project. Stakeholder analysis is another good one, having a list for your stakeholders. SharePoint also has, really good lists for calendars and displaying calendars in great views. So there's tons of different examples, and even things that might be specific to the technical area that your project is in for tracking those items in SharePoint lists. And so once we have all the metadata unlocked, that's great. What do we do with it, right? Well, I mentioned some things before, but just elaborating on that, views are a big one. So if we have the data outside of the document, we can create different SharePoint views that filter to specific documents, sort the documents a particular way, group the documents in different groups. We can create like sums at the bottom of our documents. So if we need to show like a grand total or an average or things like that, we can access all that data. And then we can go even all the way down to what that image is showing you, and I'll show you in the demo, is creating a complete custom view using something called XSL, which is definitely a high level of maturity, but once you have your data unlocked, it enables you to be able to do so much more. The other thing is search. So you're searching in SharePoint, and when your users are trying to find things, search will work a lot better if you have your data unlocked. And that was kind of what we talked about with the enterprise keywords and using managed properties. You can create a whole ton of different search things. You can modify the advanced search so that people can search for particular project IDs or different things, whatever columns you may choose. A big one that's very commonly used is SharePoint workflows, and they sound scary, but creating very simple workflows is not very difficult. And some examples, the most common examples I've seen are notifications. So if when someone submits a new risk, you want to notify your stakeholders automatically, you can create a very simple workflow that sends them all an email with information from the risk right there in the email and a link to click on it. Other examples are, an approval system for documents, action item tracking, if you want to send like overdue emails, when someone's not getting their action items done. And then another very good thing I mentioned before is reporting. So, we can access all these columns from Power BI and create whatever type of dashboards we want with that data. You can also access that data from Excel. You can access it from various reporting tools, depending on, what programs you're used to. And then you can create nice charts and graphs and display those right on your SharePoint, which is really nice. So enough slides. We will jump into our demo. So let me get out of this screen here, move that over real quick. The first thing I want to show you is our document management. So this is a SharePoint document library. If you haven't used SharePoint Online yet, this may look a little bit different than the document libraries you're used to. SharePoint Online has this new interface called the Modern Interface, so that's what we're looking at here. If you can always go back to the classic view. If you are in SharePoint Online, it'll look very similar to SharePoint 2013. In this view, you can see I've preloaded some basic documents of project management documents, a communication plan, a project charter, scope document, risk management plan. These would be all things that maybe as a project manager you currently do in a document. Your process has a template that you fill out with your stakeholders, and you store that as a document. In addition, in this view, I've added just a couple columns for metadata. So I've included a project phase column you can see here. And in this column, I've just got a few, the standard, PMI phases. And I've marked each document, based on what phase it should be kind of completed at. So that's one example of some metadata. This library also contains several different content types. So we mentioned earlier, I've created a general document, a project documentation content type, and a status report content type. So I mentioned that before. You can create different content types, and then right under the new button, you can click to create new documents. Creating metadata for your document libraries, especially in this new modern interface, is very easy. Just right over on the right-hand side here, you actually have a quick launch right here to create new fields. So these are the various, some of the various different types of fields you can create. You've got your text fields, you've got a drop-down field, they call it a choice field here, hyperlinks, people pickers. So you can kind of let your imagination run wild with what different types of data you might want to capture. The other thing you can do is control those fields based on content type. So you might have a certain field that you want to capture for, say, your status reports, like the month that status report is sent out, that you don't need to capture for, say, your communication plan. And so based on the different content type, you can capture different fields. So now we've got just our basic view. This data isn't really doing much for us in this view. So how do we use this data? Well, a good replacement for folders is group bys. And so I have another view here. I called it my by phase view. So as I switch to that, we're still looking at all the same documents, but now we have them grouped into these various, into our project phases. And so you can see I can expand. I want to see what's in the planning phase. I can see, I've got my communication plan, my scope, and my risk management plan. And these aren't actually folders. There's no folder in the document library, but they give you the same function as folders. And so it's a nice way to group your documents without using folders. Another thing we can do is filtering. So I've created a third view here called status reports. This view is just a basic view. You'll notice that I didn't include the columns here that I had before, but it is filtered to just show the content type of status reports. So you notice we only have these two documents that are two status reports that are in our document library. So it's another way to basically get folders because this view is now the equivalent of a folder where you put all your status reports. So you can get a lot of the same functions without using folders and just using metadata, and you get a lot of benefits from that. The next thing in the demo I wanted to show you was OneNote. You'll notice I have a link here to get to the project OneNote for this project that I've set up for the SharePoint site. You'll see that I've got a OneNote here. I've made a section called Meeting Notes. I've got one page here of 927, ignore this meeting, and that's my meeting that I've set up for this. And this OneNote is visible on the web. It also is synced to my OneNote on my desktop. So this is the same page that we're looking at on the web. It's on my desktop. And you'll notice that in the middle of this page, I have this little section here. This is the Outlook and Skype integration feature of OneNote. And you can access this by just clicking this little meeting details thing from here, and you can pull in any of your meetings to this OneNote page. You can also do the same thing from Outlook by adding meeting notes. So this is pretty cool. You can come in here, you can say, okay, This was a great meeting, and whatever notes you might need from your meeting. These sections up here are automatically synced from Outlook. So you've got your message that goes out in your Outlook invitation, and you also have your participants list. And the really cool thing about this participants list is it syncs with Skype. So assuming this is a Skype meeting, these boxes will automatically check after the meeting to show who joined via Skype. So you don't even need to keep track of your attendance or anything like that. It's all done for you, assuming you're using Skype. The really, really cool part about this, if that wasn't cool enough, is in your Outlook meeting notice. So this is the Outlook meeting notice for that meeting. You'll notice right here, it added this section that says View Meeting Notes, and it's got a link here that would open OneNote and a link here that would open it on the web. This gets automatically added into the meeting notice. And what's really great about that is, assuming you're working on a project team and everyone that's on that team is probably on the meeting and they all have access to your SharePoint already, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to send out your meeting notes. You don't need to publish a PDF and send it out, type up a whole Word document of who was in attendance, so forth and so on. You just, when you're done with OneNote, you just stop typing, it automatically saves, and that's it. You're done. If someone needs to view those meeting notes, you'll need to obviously provide this instruction to them, but all they need to do is open up their Outlook calendar meeting for whatever meeting they're looking for and click on this link or that link. And it pops open the OneNote Online or OneNote in the desktop that shows you your meeting notes right here and who was there and the invitation. And it's super easy to find from an end user perspective. It's a way better use case, because if I need to find meeting notes from a meeting a week ago, I either have to go sifting through my email to find the email from the project manager where they sent out the meeting notes, or I know when it was a week ago on Tuesday. I can just go to my calendar, pop open that Outlook notice, and click on the link, and it takes me straight to the meeting notes. Very, very useful feature. I highly recommend using that for your meeting notes. Moving on from OneNote, the next thing we talked about were lists. So we'll jump into what are lists. So we're going to go back to our site here. And on our site, I have several lists. And the one we'll look at is the same one in the screenshot. So we'll look at this risks list here. So you can see a list looks very similar to a document library. Now this list is not the modern interface. This is the classic interface. So if you're used to SharePoint 2013, this is what it looks like. In this list, you see we've got 3 items here. So these are 3 risks. And we can display certain columns. We also, once again, still have views, just like a document library, active risks versus closed risks. We have even more views here. And everything looks the same as the document library. The big difference with a list is there isn't an underlying document. There's no document here at all. All the data is stored in metadata columns. So for example, if we want to create a new risk, come up here, we click on new item, and now we have a form. There's no document here, although we could attach a file if we really wanted to. All of the data is represented in these fields that we needed for our process. So we can go quickly create a new risk. If the team doesn't shower, a customer might not be happy. Whatever risk we want to create, we fill out who's the owner, who's it assigned to. We'll assign that to Steven to make sure he showers. And we'll come down here, the mitigation plan. We can, tell the team to take a shower. We can adjust our likelihood or our probability and our impact or our consequence of that risk, say 50%, and it's a solid 4. And then we can fill out the rest of this information and save that risk. What that does is it adds it to our list here. So now all this data is here. We could easily create a SharePoint workflow that sends whoever the risk is assigned to an email. We could automatically assign them a task or an action item. Or maybe we want, as soon as the risk is created, the person that's assigned to has an action to go create the mitigation plan. We could automate that with a workflow and automatically assign them an action in another list to go create that mitigation plan and send them an email and let them know that they have any risk. So really you can't do any of that with a document, right? If Stephen was assigned in the document, we wouldn't be able to send him an automatic email. So that's the big advantage of using lists and metadata, even in your document libraries, is you can really automate things. You can create all sorts of different views. And so just to show you that that risk view for like a super advanced view down here, this is that XSL risk view that I had the screenshot of. And you can see here that I've created just a little table. It's got the shading of your risk cube, you know, your impact up the left-hand side, your probability across the top, and it's interactive. So if I want to see what are these medium high ones here, you can click on it. It takes you back over to your risks list and automatically filters it to the 2 risks that fall into that category. So it's really nice. You can create, you know, really anything you want at that level, and anything you might need. So that is it for our demo. Let me bring our presentation back up.
Kevin, will you make sure you leave your demo up? I have a question on your demo.
Sure.
All right, are you ready?
Yeah, we can take that now if you want.
Okay, so before we were talking about the Outlook and the Skype meetings, we were in the demo in Project Online, and one of our attendees, their company isn't Project Online, but the document library view that they have is different from ours. So can you talk about how you got to the view you had?
Sure. So if you're I think what you're probably getting at is the modern versus the classic interface. So this is the modern interface, and if I click down here to return to the classic view, this is the classic interface. You know, if you're in online, that's the only place you're going to access the modern interface. If you're in 2013, it will look like this. There's just some it's mostly visual is the only change. Just in terms of functionality, you can do pretty much all the same things you can do in the classic as you can do in the modern, and so forth, back and forth. If your company administrator has allowed you to choose, then you can use these buttons on the left-hand side to choose which type of view you want. So I just went back to the classic. I can click here to go back to the modern. If your company administrator has the settings that allow you to choose. If you don't see those buttons, your administrator may have the settings set to force one or the other, in which case, as an end user, you can't really do much except for ask the administrator if they can enable that for you. So hopefully that was the part of the view that you were referring to with that question. Are there any other questions before I go to the summary slide, Pam?
Yeah, there's one more question. And I was just going to let you guys know that if that doesn't answer the questions that we have, to go ahead and let us know, and we can explain more via email. The last question that we have is, how do you use the same metadata throughout all of the document libraries?
It's a good question. So that is what I referred to when I said site columns and site content types. So at your site level, and actually depending on how many different sites you have, you can do it at a top level site. You can create what are called site columns, and so you manage that in here in your SharePoint site settings. There's a section here under Web Designer Galleries called Site Columns and Site Content Types, and so you can create columns at your site level. And then you can also add those columns to content types at your site level. And then you can add either that content type or just that column to a particular document library, or 10 document libraries, or however many you want. And the real big advantage there is if you need to make a change to that column, you can just come in here at the top level of your site or even your site collection, make the change to the column, hit the apply button, and it automatically pushes that out to every library that's using that column or that content type. So I would recommend, wherever possible, using site content types with site columns. And then if you need to just add a column, you can create a new site column, add it to the content type, push the changes out. All your libraries will now have that column. So it makes managing multiple libraries that have similar fields much easier. Anything else, Pam?
No, that's it. Thank you, Kevin.
Alrighty. We will just quickly run through our summary slide here. So what we covered today, SharePoint is a very powerful document management system, and it does a lot more. So if you're only using SharePoint for document management, try and expand your horizons. Build, document libraries using metadata, set of folders, create new views, and you can even transfer from there to taking your current, document-based processes, transferring those into lists, building notification emails and different things on those lists to help automate your process and increase efficiency. The other big thing we covered that I'm a very big fan of is using OneNote. So you try that out, see how that works for you, see how you can integrate with Outlook and help make the task of taking meeting notes much easier. So that is all I had. I'll let you close out, Pam.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. And I just wanted to say that it was really helpful where you set the reminders for Stephen to, remind the team to shower. So not only did we learn about SharePoint, but we learned about, the team's personal hygiene. So that was great. So thank you, Kevin, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We welcome your questions, suggestions, and we want your feedback. For more information, please contact Advisicon, through our website, email, or just give us a call. Once you exit today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete and submit the survey in order to get your PDUs. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar, and we'll also include all the PDU information in that email. So on behalf of Advisicon, Kevin, and myself, we thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you participate in future webinars. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.